you have 20 microphones, can you put groups like on five, 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 and they can share the same frequencies?
So the same frequencies, you're not going to be able to set. As that energy is transmitted, you lose some of it. So digital gets better and better. We start adding better sample rates, better bit depth to get more and more accurate reproductions of analog signals, right? So, if intermods and distortion and dropouts and line of sight. Imagine a microphone there and a microphone there. Well, this antenna might see that microphone, and this antenna might see that one. You see what I'm saying? Like it makes it a lot easier for things to travel. Thank you. It makes it a lot easier for things to travel to the antennas and get picked up.
It's just for latency issues?
Not necessarily. Again, it could create intermod distortion. It could create dropouts. There's a lot of potential problems there. Especially when we talk about reflective surfaces like this. So those actually solve quite a bit of problems, which is why I like displaying it. A lot of people don't know those exist, but they are very helpful. Directional, I see a lot of people misuse these. I'm sure you do too. I'm sure everybody has probably misused these because they don't realize that they're directional. You want to face the whole thing. Like if this is what it looks like, you want to face it directly at the mic this way, not this way, right? A lot of times these are best used from front of house, pointed directly at the stage. And that's because they have a cardioid pickup pattern, so they're going to not be incredibly focused. They're going to be forward focusing, but not like this. You want to point those at the stage. That's going to be your best way to do that. So if I had those antennas here with me today, I would probably put them right there in front of house facing this way. However, there is a caveat to that, and that is if you don't have enough distance between that and the microphone, it doesn't really matter where you put it.
I talked to somebody earlier. I've dealt with this several times. Church gets a call, my customer gets a call from a church and they're having issues, and I go check it out, and they're having dropouts all the time. And I walk in, and the first thing I do is look around, and chances are I'm going to see a directional antenna right there, and that's what's happening. Like, oh, we spend the money on a better antenna, it's going to be better. No, it's not. And a lot of times they just bought it because they wanted to run the antenna remotely because the rack was in a closet. I'm like, just grab this one, take it out, run a cable, and set it up right there.
Yep.
It's gonna do what works for you because again, you're just right there and it's directional. And
I'm really glad you didn't
second they
unplug
do
the
it-
antenna that we're actually using.
No, I know
but-
what I'm doing. We're right here.
Yeah, which brings me to the next point. If you have a scenario where you need an antenna right there on the side of the stage, you actually want to use a helical antenna. And the reason why is because that will focus all the way across this stage directionally. A lot of times they use helical antennas on large festivals for in-ear monitors because you don't really want to have a bunch of people in between your in-ear monitors and your mixing console, plus monitors are usually on side stage. So you use a helical antenna to capture across the stage. So everything has its place, right? And I think this is a really important slide, and we can stop here for a second because I know there's probably questions. But antenna selection is honestly probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see in wireless. And I think it's just because a lot of people don't understand that they all do serve a purpose, but they all need to be used exactly for that purpose, right? So who here is using paddle antennas? Are you using them correctly?
I pointed to get directly, like, this end of it is pointing at the mic.
Perfect.
But I run mine stage right or stage left at the pulmonary center here.
Okay. So it's a large stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about 60 foot wide. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's probably fine. I would say the only thing you're going to maybe run into there is if you have a performer that gets like way over here, and then you might experience some dropouts just because of the distance. And you can sometimes solve that if you have the active version of those because you can amplify them, but then you're introducing noise into your system. Maybe not always the best thing. So does anybody else use paddle antennas? Pretty normal? No issues there? Big stage? Yeah, makes sense.
I had to replace, I guess, my coax.
Yeah, there was a slide in here about cabling, and I took it out because it's like real boring, you know. Nobody wants to talk about coax cable today. Anybody using helical antennas anywhere? No? Okay.
Any monitor engineers here?
Monitor guys?
Monitor guys?
Monitor guy? I talked to you earlier. The helicals over
No,
here?
they're using fins.
The
They're using
fins?
direction, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's one of those that every time I have a touring band and they don't know my questions, what kind of station they don't know, I'm like, if you're going every night traveling and you don't know what you have, a lot of times just take both of them. Because you never know.
Yep.
You never know what you're going to find.
But
And
this-
if it's within the budget, why not? Do it.
Hopefully this answered some questions for you guys about antenna selection. If you have more questions later or whatever, just stop me or we can talk afterwards. I want to make sure we get through. Go ahead.
What's the way to choose the antenna for provider? Is just you have your receiver.
Mhm.
You can use connect off your cable.
Mhm. That's it. That's it. So, like you can see, all of our stuff here is plugged in directly into the front, but you could just run a BNC cable way over here, plug it into the same thing. Yep.
If I have like 100 mics, let's say, I need to run how many antennas?
So we're going to talk about that. What you probably need in that situation is a combiner. And what that does is it takes multiple racks of receivers and it combines them so they can use just 2 antennas. Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I have a very confusing slide to show. So
Just to confirm, all of these antennas can go transmit and receive, so they can use for microphones and IEMs, correct?
correct.
Which one is better?
Which one's better? It depends. It depends on your scenario. I personally, 9 times out of 10, I'm probably going to use fins or a half wave or the pipe bomb. Those are like the 3 that I'm primarily going to use. The helical ones, they're very specialized because they're like so focused. It's pretty rare that I'm using those. But like, you know, if you're on a football field and you want to pick up just one mic, helical all day because you can focus it onto one body pack. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course. Okay, we already did this. We kind of talked about this, but these are both omnidirectional microphones. You can see that they have omnidirectional pickup patterns. This is your directional fin. You can see that that picks up in front of it in a cardioid pattern. This is a half cardioid because this is typically wall mounted and there's a boundary behind it, so it can't pick up anything behind it. This is how a helical works, which this is actually really confusing because it's like in like a parallel universe or something and like kind of hard to understand, but basically forward, right? And this is also important to note. Every single antenna that Shure makes is wideband except for the half-wave antenna. So most products are narrowband products. So that's not super important today, but that will be very important in the future. So there's that. Forward gain, this is just we talked about this a bit. You can have active antennas where you can add additional gain to it to make them pick up farther. Active antennas typically go from -6 to +12 dB. It also typically looks like this. And choosing the right antenna. We already talked about that. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, anything? Great. Let's talk about the placement of antennas. And we sort of touched on this a little bit already, but let's just make sure we didn't miss anything. Like antenna orientation. Okay, how many people set their antennas like this? Anybody? No? Good. What about like this? No? This? Yeah. This is what you want to do. And the reason for this, again, if we remember how RF works, there's a wave up and down, there's a wave side to side, right? If you're placed this way, you're only picking up one of those. If you're placed this way, you're receiving both of those. So very important, you want your antennas straight up and down, possibly with a little bit of a a tilt, and that might just be because you don't want antennas to be too close together, and we'll talk about the reason why there. You want to avoid parallel surfaces. That is because our frequencies bounce, as we talked about earlier. So if you have an antenna that's right up against something that's metal, you're going to get really weird dropouts because you're going to get it, and then it's going to bounce back and forth between that surface and the antenna. Don't do that. You don't want that. You don't want your antennas like this, again, because it's not going to pick up RF correctly. Okay, placing antennas above obstacles. Not a bad idea, you know. It creates a better line of sight between the antenna and the RF transmitter. Not a horrible idea. So we see this a lot in music venues, houses of worship. They'll mount antennas on the ceiling or on the wall, sometimes on the truss. Good idea. One note here, it's not in this slide, but I feel like it's important to mention. if you do have an antenna and it's pointed at a transmitter, but there's a bunch of human bodies in the way, it's going to stop working. And the reason why, human bodies are made of 70% water. Water is just not going to pass RF. It's just very difficult to do. So if you're in a venue and that venue is packed and your antennas are right here, it's going to be, you might experience dropouts. So the reason this slide is here to just say, by placing antenna above objects, it eliminates those kinds of issues and it creates a better line of sight from transmitter to antenna. Okay, no requirement for symmetry in digital antenna configuration. So what that means is you can mix and match antennas. So if you have a unique room that requires, let's say, a paddle over here and a helical over here to avoid some type of interference coming from this way, you can do that. This is specific to digital systems. No, we're not using a lot of analog anymore, but don't do this with analog. And because we saw it earlier, if you look at intermods and things, how close things can be together, you're just going to run into interference. You want to have symmetry in analog, but in digital, it does not matter. Number of antennas per lineup. So too many antennas on the same lineup, not good, right? We talked about that a bit. You can change that by combining things, but for the most part, you want to use 2 antennas, right? Okay, a couple of examples of things you should probably not do. Don't put an antenna behind copper conduit. Like, what? That's dumb. There's a bunch of metal in front of it. Don't do that. This is kind of similar to these. Like, this isn't going to work for a few reasons. Number one, because I don't think wavelengths can pass through that, depending on their wavelength. And then also, the antennas are very close together, and they're not straight up and down. You want to avoid that. I know these are cardioid and they pick up front, but again, the way that RF travels, you want to make sure that those are straight up and down, perpendicular with the earth. And again, the metal cage is too small.
What is the appropriate space between 2 antennas?
You want to have at least a half wave. So I know I showed the math and I was like, this is dumb math and we don't need it, but you just think about it that way. Like typically, like a low end frequency, like 60 hertz, is going to be about 6 feet long, right? Now you're not transmitting 60 hertz over wireless, right? But you might be transmitting 500, which is going to be about 5 inches, I think, if my math is right. So you want about 5-6 inches away from each other. And typically, or usually we put them 18 inches away when we build things. And there's a reason for that. Because if you go 18 inches away, you're basically eliminating all problems across all frequencies. So you see how far these antennas are on these racks? That's good. Anything beyond that, you're good. Yep. So this is a baseball stadium, multiple baseball arenas. It all has wire, metal around it to protect the fans. And then the center is where the mixer is and all the antennas. This isn't going to work because the wireless microphones are beyond that metal gate. It's going to interfere with RF, right? Which I'm pretty sure is what the next slide says. Yeah. Okay, so these are half-wave antennas. They're in a rack. They're pointed straight. Who can tell me what's wrong with this? What'd you say? Position. There's one more thing. Actually, there's 2 more things, because distance is correct. And then what'd you say? A lot of metal around it, right? Those are all correct. This is not going to work, or it may work, but it's going to work poorly for all of those reasons. There's metal in the rack. They're way too close together. They're positioned incorrectly. Don't do that. Okay, minimum spacing requirements. We're going to talk about that right now, officially. So you see these here. These are not far enough away. Again, we want to make sure that they're at least 6 to 18 inches away. 6 is honestly really pushing it. I really recommend 18 inches. That's probably what you really want. That's going to eliminate any issues. So a setup like this, essentially what you've done by doing this is you've made one antenna. And we know from earlier that if you have just one antenna, you could run into interference and problems, right? And when they're this close together, they just don't have the distance to capture those waves. So make sure that you have minimum spacing. Okay, and then I think this is the last one. It took me a minute to even find the antenna here, but it's actually way in the back on the concrete mounted. And I don't know if you could tell, but this is a ceiling tile. So this antenna will be hidden by ceiling tiles. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. Okay, so again, antenna best practices. Make sure you place them above the audience or other obstructions. Be aware of obstructions. It's very important. Keep cable runs short if you can, although long cable runs are possible using the correct cable. So not the hugest issue, but it is something to be cautious about. Place as close to the transmitters as practical, but you don't want to put them right next to it. So for example, I have a bunch of body packs on top of our rack here, and I was getting RF overloads earlier because it was literally sitting on top of the antenna because RF is going this far. So you don't want to do that. Make sure you place them as close as you can, but practically. You don't want them sitting on top of each other. Place away from other sources of interference, like metal, like a gate, some type of fence. Don't do that. And use directionality appropriately. We're talking about antenna selection again. Cool. Any questions about antennas while we're still here?
I guess in the case like you're showing when they're in the rack now, like I know you have the ones in the front. Do you have extenders for the ones in the back?
So we typically want to mount them in front, especially when we have cases or rack cases like this. You can mount them in the back, but basically what's happening here is there's like a little punch out in the rack ears, and then we just like plug it in there. But if you were to do it in the back,
That one is like the 4-channel scatter, but the one on the left is like the single units. It's supposed to have 2 per unit, right? Correct?
well, yeah. So it would be in that case, yes, it would be 2 per unit. Yes.
There's one in the front and one in the back.
No. There's two. There's two on both. Yeah.
The only one we have working is the SXC.
Yeah, we're not using all of those. We're only using 2 of those. So
We used the bottom one just because we wanted to bring you LXD. If we were using, I'd probably get a combiner. Put them together.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, now we're going to answer the other antenna questions that have been kind of a little off the surface here, which is antenna distribution in large installations. So now we're going to talk about combining. These are those really very confusing slides I was talking about earlier. So let's just talk about what to consider when we're combining. You may or may not have ever seen a combiner, but basically it's just a blank rack space, but on the back it's just a bunch of B and C connections and then 2 outputs for 2 antennas, right? The things you want to consider though is what devices exist using UHF frequencies in the space that you're trying to deploy this. What is the expectation of coverage? What is, obviously go through your antenna placement knowledge that you have now, and then output power of devices in intended range. We're not going to really talk about output power that much because a lot of times if you use Wireless Workbench or another software, it's going to automatically deploy power. So that's really not a conversation we're going to get too deep in. It can be real heady and it can just take a lot of time. So we're just going to kind of glance over that. But these are the main considerations you want to think about when you think about antenna distribution. Why do you want to do it? It's going to prevent interference. It's going to allow you to use more microphone channels on less antennas. It reduces equipment. You can fit more stuff in your rack. Okay, let's talk about splitters. So there's 2 types of splitters. It's passive and active. Pretty self-explanatory there. Passive requires no power. Active is introducing additional power so that you can get a stronger signal, right? On the left, we have a passive splitter. It operates bi-directionally, so you can plug 2 antennas into that and plug, so you can have one point source there, or you can do it the other way, where you have one antenna that's receiving 2 cables, or rather 2 outputs. On the right over here, if I'm in somebody's way, just tell me to move. But on the right, this is what an antenna distribution sort of looks like. So on the bottom, we have four channel Axient digital receivers, totaling 16 channels. Is that right? 5. That's 5. Sorry. So that's 5 4-channel Axient digital receivers. So that's 20 channels, and they're all running off of 2 antennas. And the way we're doing that is we're taking the outputs of all of those rack units and giving them to that distribution so they can distribute the antenna signals to all those devices. It'll cascade down to them. So, passive splitter, pretty self-explanatory here. There's a bunch of math involved in how much you're going to lose and what the minimum input level, maximum input level is, etc. But one thing you need to know is when you do split things like this, you do lose a little bit of signal. A lot of time it's not very much unless you're using very, very large systems. With something like this, you're going to lose 3.5 decibels approximately of signal. With your antennas, that's really not that much in antenna world. When you see wireless workbench later, that'll make a lot more sense. Smart passive combiner. So this is something that's brand new. This only works with a new product that we have called ADPSM, which is the Axient digital version of our in-ear monitor systems by Shure. It's brand new. It's like shipping like next week or something, or 2 weeks from now, right? I think so. I don't know. I don't even know what day it is today. So, yeah, so this is basically going to handle the power for you. And what this thing does is it recognizes when it's connected to our ADPSM system. It'll automatically change power. It'll automatically switch between things. So cool stuff coming out. Okay, so this is how passive distribution works. So this is 2 channels. They both have an A and B antenna. They're both connected to passive systems, or passive splitters. You're sending antenna A and antenna A to splitter A, and that's giving you antenna A. Do the same thing with B, boom, you have 2 antennas for 2 different systems. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, now we're going to get crazy. This is how active antenna distribution works. So this is what you find in a lot of large deployments. You'll find this probably on tours, in corporate settings, large venues, etc., etc. This is when you need to combine a lot of stuff, right? So you can kind of get how this is working, right? The white parts are your antenna outputs. Everything else is where you bring antennas from other systems into it and connect, just like the passives. It's exactly the same, just a little more confusing. So this is 4 4-channel receivers connected to 1 distribution system so that you have 2 antennas for 16 channels. So you can see all the antenna A are connected to the antenna A side, all the antenna B are connected to the antenna B side, and then you have 2 antennas. Does that make sense? Does this answer some of the questions you guys had earlier? Cool. Now we're going to get real confusing, because now you could do 2 levels of that, and you could have 2 distribution systems that connect to each other. And so you see now we have, 32 channels connected to 2 distributions using only 2 antennas. And we see how that's working. You see how the A and B from one is cascaded to the next one? Okay. So if that's not confusing enough, you can also do like 64 channels. I think that's 64, yeah. So, yeah, you can see how this can get pretty deep, right? And don't worry, there's not 100 in. Yeah. So yeah, by using 5 combiners, you can then combine 64 channels together. Yeah. So does this make sense for earlier when we were asking about how many antennas do you need for a lot of channels? Okay, great.
And if you forget everything he said tonight, remember 3 words: Sure, accessory wizard. Google those things, and the first thing you'll see is a website that takes you to Shure's website, and you can say which which lines is going to be BLX, SLXD, all the way to Accent or PSM. You click it. It says how many receivers or transmitters. It depends. How many channels? I think it's going to be either how many receivers or how many channels of PSM.
Yep.
And then if you want to rack it, if the antenna is remote, it even tells you how far from the unit, from the rack will the antenna be. So it gives you even the cable length. And
cable type.
Cable type.
Yeah.
And he's going to give you a picture like this and a list of things that you want to get.
And it's going to say good luck.
I use it as the Shure sales rep. I use it all the time. Every customer that calls me before I do a quote, I just plug it in and make sure everything is there.
Yeah, sure. Very true. Sure, accessory wizard.
Yeah.
Write it down.
And since I'm here, remember Shure Frequency Finder.
We're going to talk about that
You
later.
going there?
Yeah, we're going there. What's up?
The cliffhanger
How
for
much
you.
does this cost? 64 channels?
A lot. I'll be honest with you, man. I don't know the prices of anything. I deal with the tech behind the stuff, and technically I work with people, distributors, and stuff like that. But whenever someone asks me the price, I'm like, ask Felix, man. I don't know.
I'm guessing just without even looking at it, probably close to 180.
Sure.
With everything
Yeah, sure.
ish. I might be wrong, but
Yeah,
I think it's accent.
probably $10,000.
Yeah.
And then the antenna for the combiners are probably at least 800.
Yeah. Yeah. It's expensive.
I'm
However,
close because I've done one of them before, so I think about 180.
I'm going to tell you this. If you need 64 channels, you probably got enough money to afford it. You're probably charging a lot for that gig. But yeah, so this is how 64 channels with 5 distribution amplifiers works. Does that make sense? Hopefully that answers some questions. All right, now we're going to get even more confusing, but with less lines. You can do multi-room antenna distribution. So what this is doing is this is 4 4-channel receivers connected to 1 distribution amplifier, which is connected to 2 different rooms. See how that works? That one actually gets me every time. So, and then
I guess it's just that cable line to the other room. Right?
exactly, and you can get even deeper with that. You can use multiple splitters, multiple line amplifiers. I mean, it gets crazy, right? And I know this seems like a pretty improbable thing, especially to some of you who are used to live concerts and events and stuff, but this happens all the time. This happens every day. We have to help design stuff like this. So, yeah, it gets kind of nuts. Okay, so recap here. We didn't talk about this, but you kind of want to keep your gain and loss plus or minus 5 dB. So you got to think every passive splitter that you use is going to lose about 3.5. So if you're using multiple of those, you need a line amplifier to bring that back up. If you're using active distros, not so much of a problem because they're kind of going to handle that. You want to use as few antennas as practical, mainly 2. You saw every single example had just 2 antennas, unless it was for multiple rooms. You want to minimize overlap, especially in digital systems. Higher output power transmitters may be required, and that's when we're talking about active versus passive. And then RF gain structure of the antenna system to achieve unity gain. That's really the same as the first point. You just want it to not have a ton of loss over that. Okay, now we're going to get to the stuff that is very practical. It's about how we actually do frequency coordination. So we've talked about antennas. We've talked about how RF works. We have hopefully a pretty good understanding of how to set up the system, right? Okay, how do you actually use the system? How do you actually assign frequencies and make sure that you're not getting any interference or dropouts or any of that, right? Okay, so let's talk about the basics first. You want to use unique frequencies for every transmitter. You can't have multiple transmitters on the same frequency. It's just not going to work. You're going to get interference. Consider total wireless requirements. That's kind of a no-brainer. know your RF environment. So you want to know what your obstacles are. You want to know what type of application it is. You want to just know basically what you can and can't use in the frequency spectrum, which we'll talk about that. And you want to coordinate the frequencies so that nothing is overlapping or interchanging. You're not getting weird intermods and stuff like that. Okay, frequency coordination, all it is coordinating a frequency to a device. It can be very complicated, and a lot of people can get very confused, but that's all it is. You're just taking a frequency, assigning it to a device. Okay, so this is RF propagation loss. This is not super important nowadays, but it does come into play in large venues sometimes. You just have to know that over distance, you will lose power over RF. Right? Easy. Okay. More noise means less range. So this is a very crude drawing. I think Felix drew this. Didn't even color it in all the way. So RF noise floor, that's basically like just random RF stuff. Like if you really think about it, in this room, there's probably so much RF in this room right now between everybody's cell phone, between the mics that we have, between the mics that they have in the building. You also have lights that generate a little bit of RF. Almost everything in this room generates RF, right? So the noise floor is just like an audio noise floor. It's just noise, right? You want to avoid the noise floor of RF because that's what's going to give you interference. And you'll see here that these peaks above the noise floor, as you get more noise, they become less and less visible. That's exactly how frequency coordination works as well. Okay, so we talked about this briefly, but active digital TV channels. So again, a TV channel is just a section of the RF spectrum. DTV is typically always on, as opposed to an analog TV. There's almost no analog TV stations anymore. They're almost all digital. So this is kind of just a heads up that like they don't go off. In the back in the day when you would do frequency coordination, if you did a coordination at 2 p.m. and your show wasn't until 6 p.m. and you put your frequencies in there and you turned your stuff on at 6 p.m., you might actually get interference because the news came on at 5 o'clock and it wasn't on when you did your scan, right? That's really not as much of a problem today, but it does happen from time to time, especially if you're traveling. Sometimes you're in sort of remote areas, or you'll find like a pirate TV station or something like that. So not a huge deal anymore. Okay, so we sort of talked about this, but let's talk about how the FCC kind of screwed everything up. So in 1997, the green represents 470 to 806, which is what was available in the frequency spectrum in 1997. A lot of space. And then in 2008, all the 700 megahertz stuff got sold to Verizon and AT&T and all the other cell phone companies. And that eliminated 33% of the RF frequency spectrum that was available for us to use for microphones in 2008. And it happened again in 2017. They sold another 58% of the RF frequency band, not taking into consideration that live events and music and wireless microphones are growing. Maybe not as fast as cell phones, but you get the point. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the future, right? We continually see less and less spectrum available. Makes it harder and harder for us to fit frequencies into the spectrum when we're trying to do frequency coordination. It's a bit of a pain. And here's an example. These are some of the most congested cities in the entire United States. Everything you see in red is not available space in the RF spectrum. So that's horrible, man. That's horrible. I can tell you, I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and I had this exact setup in my home, and I did a scan one day, and I was like, there are 6 frequencies available at my house. So it's crazy, man. Like, that's not a lot of space. And we have to sometimes fit hundreds of wireless microphones, not just in your shows, but also other places that are happening at the same time. So it can be quite challenging. So there is a need for very accurate and very robust tools. Yeah.
So you said that Phoenix was the hardest city to set up in?
In the entire country, yeah. It's
why is that harder than Chicago if Chicago only has one?
So that's because you see there's some spaces over here in Chicago that are below the noise floor. Even though they're taken up by TV stations, they're like a little bit outside of town, so you can actually go on top of them in some cases. Not necessarily the case in some of these smaller cities. New York being a good example, very compact. So yeah, Chicago's not great either. But I will say, Shure is based out of Chicago, so they have a little bit of pull there. You know, they grease a couple palms. All right, so Felix talked about this earlier. We're going to talk about it right now, the wireless frequency finder. So I have this pulled up somewhere, and I'm going to show you how it works.
Well, he does that. An anecdote I've seen in the last few years with Shure is going to, the Austin area. So when people from Shure, they always do some marketing stuff backstage for the artist, and because I'm the local guy, they're like, we need your helping. And it's just one of the marketing guys for Shure with a camera. He has a microphone, and he interviews. Every time an artist comes up the stage, they talk to them and hand them a gift. Only one channel wireless. He cannot turn it on without clearing the frequency with RF tent at the festival. Because if he happens to step into any stage, you might have Dua Lipa singing, and then you say, hey, we got the microphone, and everybody will hear it, we'll get fined. Yeah. So it's really interesting. The first thing when we get to the park is set up the rack, don't even turn it on, go clear what frequency you can use.
Yep.
Before that. It's nerve-wracking.
It gets
I don't want to
intense.
put it, I don't even want to make a mistake when
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah.
So this is the wireless frequency finder. I highly encourage you to use this if you're deploying wireless frequencies anywhere. I've already typed in where we are, which is McAllen. I can select what type of device I'm using. Let's say I'm using what I'm actually using right now, which is SLXD.
And only US.
Yeah.
I know a lot of you guys do work international. This is only a database.
Yeah, I should. That's a very good point. This database is only for the US right now. So if I search this will tell me exactly what channel bands are available and how many microphones I can put in there. It's kind of hard to see, but this is saying in band J52 there are 25 available frequencies where I'm standing right here. In H55 there's 10, and in G58 there are 9. This is a very conservative estimate. What this does is it uses FCC's information about TV stations and things that are currently deployed and registered with the FCC, and then it gives you a very conservative amount of channels that you could build your wireless into. I actually did a scan in here earlier today, and there were 88 channels available. So again, very conservative. On Axion, which Axion scans across all frequency bands. So yeah.
I did a here with Accent, and you said 88.
Yeah.
Insurance 71.
Yeah.
There. And if you open that plus sign right there, you'll see TV stations. And you're going to see like your local NBC and CBS and all of that, but you'll see a lot of like local access stuff. That's why it's important to scan the room, because just because it's there doesn't mean that local access is on right now.
Right.
Or something like that. Or the antenna is weak and it doesn't reach this building for some reason.
True.
Or the opposite. You might have a performance center across the street that is just taking over all of that. So none of that will matter at that point when you show up. So nothing beats scanning the place.
Even if you use this, you should still scan with the actual microphones, and for that exact reason. This is really more for if you're looking to buy and deploy microphones so that you can buy the right product, and so that you don't buy something that doesn't have available channels in the area.
For Hermes is a perfect example. When they place their orders for what you see on the walls, that frequency is important. And what comes here, it may be different. Eddie, some of the frequencies you see here might be different in San Antonio. If you call me, a Hermes guy calls me, I find out that the customer's in Houston for some reason, I'm like, whoa, let's check really quick. Let's make sure, because you might not be able to sell what's on the wall right here. You never know. So.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so again, Very powerful tool. It's very helpful if you're deploying a lot of stuff. We'll breeze through this a bit. We kind of already talked about this, but this again will show you what TV channels there are, where approximately where they're located, and what TV channels are available in the frequency spectrum. Okay, spectrum scanning. So right now we're using the 8600, which is the device on the bottom, but it's not the only device on the market. You've probably used all sorts of different stuff if you've ever done this. Most likely, you have probably used a Shure receiver to do this by just picking a frequency and being like, cool, got it. And those work great. The reason that we use the 8600 is because it's a full spectrum scan, so you can actually use multiple different frequency bands. It's just a powerhouse like that. And again, using a scanner for RF coordination, really the way to go. You don't want to just fire blind. You want to be able to pick and choose exactly what frequency you're deploying and see exactly where it lands in the spectrum. Okay, so this is what a scan looks like. We've seen a couple of these, but the noise floor is what we're focusing on right here. So in this scenario, the noise floor is kind of that bottom red line, and then the green line indicates TV channels, right? So you want to be aware of the noise floor. If you have a very high noise floor, that could potentially cause interference and problems. All right, guys, only 25 more slides, so we're getting there. Okay, so this is what a clean noise floor looks like. This is where I don't know where they scanned this. This is insane. This is nothing. There's nothing here. So this had to be in like Antarctica or something. This doesn't exist anywhere in the United States. Actually, maybe not anywhere, maybe somewhere super remote, but might have been. And then this is what a noisy RF floor looks like. And you can see here, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot, you can see thin stuff that typically indicates some type of wireless device. Thicker stuff is typically TV stations. You can see there's a lot of TV stations here. There's a lot of stuff going on. Okay. These are what TV channels look like. When you've done this enough times, you can kind of pick out TV stations pretty quick. Pretty good indicators is it's a block of frequencies. You can also see, especially on the one on the very left, you see how it's like tall, but then around the bottom of it, it's kind of like rounded off. Those are all intermods. So that's an analog TV station. So once you do this enough times, you kind of can figure out what a TV station looks like. And this is typically what two-way radio looks like. Sometimes this also looks like wireless microphones. And this is what an LED wall looks like with no image on it on the RF spectrum. So that's like weird and sometimes can interfere with your stuff. And this is what it looks like with an image. You just see a little bit of boost towards the bottom there. Anyways. Okay, we've been talking about intermods a lot, and I showed you a picture of what analog intermods look like, but let's talk about what they look like on an RF frequency spectrum. So on the left, you can see these are two wireless microphones, and on the right, you can see two wireless microphones, but with intermods. And the way that intermods work is that they're basically like harmonics of radio frequencies. That's the easiest way to explain it. So you see how they're evenly spaced? You'll typically find that intermods happen at a very specific frequency. You don't want that. Intermods are bad. They can interfere with stuff. And again, we'll go back to this slide, which shows you the analog versus digital intermodulation. You want to stay with digital, mainly to avoid intermodulation and interference, right? Okay. Frequency coordination to minimize intermod effects. Yeah, that is a pointless slide because duh. So we talked about this earlier, preset groups and channels. So channels are pre-selected to work best for multiple systems. Not every company does this the same way, but it's sure the way it works is we have a group and then we have a channel count, right? So a group indicates a TV channel. So in this case, we're looking at, well, on the left it's TV 42, but on the right it's TV 41. And then there are channels within that are all different frequencies, right? So essentially what you're doing with a group and a channel is you're saying, hey, I'm taking this block and I'm putting this many in there, right? That's how Shure does it. There are other companies that do it differently, and sometimes they call it different stuff, but ultimately this is what's happening, right? Custom compatibility list. So how many people here use Wireless Workbench? 1, 2, 3, a few of you, handful? Okay. So if you use Wireless Workbench, you're probably familiar with this. Custom compatibility is basically just, you can set the amount of spacing you want between devices to avoid intermod. You can set how much noise floor you want. You can set what frequencies to cut off on, stuff like that. The reason this slide is here is just to show that with a spectrum analyzer and with software like Wireless Workbench, you can get very granular and very accurate with your frequency coordination, which is honestly what you want. Because by doing that, you can avoid any type of television channel interference or any other interference because you have a very granular way of adjusting that, right? So you can view intermods in Wireless Workbench, but this is kind of what they look like, and it's not really incredibly helpful. So the thicker two bars, those are both wireless frequencies, and the thinner two are intermods. In my opinion, this is a little confusing. You can see how there's like a little darker line in there that indicates their signal strength, which is typically how you would view an intermod. I personally would rather just see it on the frequency spectrum, but this is here just to say, hey, if you're in Wireless Workbench, this is an option where it'll give you that. Okay, so I'm going to go over actual Wireless Workbench stuff as far as what we've actually done here in just a moment. But for a moment, I'm going to talk about sort of the future of wireless. So we talked a little bit about WMAS and wideband, stuff like that. It's not ever going to replace narrowband because that's important. You need to be able to accurately select frequencies and put them in certain places. However, wideband is highly regarded as the future of wireless, right? Because you can send audio bidirectionally, meaning within that block of frequencies, you can send frequencies to IEMs or come back from microphones using the same equipment. You can, it's one rack unit, and you can have both ways, right? That's something that most everybody in the United States is waiting for final approval on, which has to come from Congress. So, who knows when that's going to happen? But as soon as it does, wireless wideband technology is going to be available. You're going to start seeing that kind of stuff come from everybody. Shure has ADPSM, which is wideband available. Other manufacturers have other stuff that they've released. But now, hopefully after this, you have a little bit better understanding of how that works and why that might be a desirable thing. Has anybody read or heard anything about WMAS, YMAS, anything like that? Okay, we're going to skip this then. Because you will hear about that stuff, and now that you know the difference in how it works versus narrowband stuff, it's just important to understand why it's marketed and why it's, made available the way it is. And so if there are any questions about that, get with me after. I can talk your ear off about it because I'm a nerd like that. Okay. This is, again, WMAS stuff. This is just kind of how it works. Again, bidirectional audio. So that's coming, where you're going to be able to use one unit to go both ways, forwards and backwards. So that's pretty cool stuff. And again, WMAS is just far more reliable because you're using a large chunk. You don't have to worry about interference nearly as much. It's a much more reliable thing. And it's going to make coordination much, much easier. And it won't replace narrowband. Okay, moving on. So this is Shure's wideband PSM. Again, in-ear monitors. It operates in wideband. People have been asking for this for a really long time, so this is like a big deal for a lot of people in the touring industry. It's very cool.
As the sales rep, I'm gonna keep going back to that. That's the future right here. Anybody right now that's asking me for PSM 1000, I'm telling them yes, we can sell you PSM 1000, and it's still amazing, but we should consider ADPSM. So people have been asking for digital. PSM and BLX were the only two analog things left, and PSM 1000, ADPSM is the first digital PSM. We're taking orders already, and there's a quad and a dual transmitter. Both of them do Dante as well. So, and there's Show Link in there as well.
Yep.
We haven't even talked too much about, but basically gives you the ability of changing the frequency on the body pack from
afar,
From
from an iPad
yeah, exactly.
or your phone.
So you have it in things like ADX1 already and things like that, and you rarely get to use it at a show unless you're talking Beyonce or somebody with that level. Referees, yeah. Football referees use it a lot because it's easier to change the referee from far away, but rarely you see it in the touring world because there's sometimes it's easier and cheaper just to have a second unit and just swap it really quick, or change a guitar with a body pack. IEM is going to be different because it's usually body worn, and that's going to be huge in there. Another thing that ADPSM can do is you can switch it to analog mode. So if you're in a big touring band and you already have the band all on PSM 1000, you can. There's two reasons for that. There really is one reason for that. Very minimal latency. You might have somebody that hears that latency, and then you go, well, let's go back to analog mode. And the body packs, the PSM 1000 body packs will work. There's also, as for early adopters, if you have a band and you have IEMs everywhere, you could change the transmitter first and leave everybody on body packs, and later on just purchase all the body packs and switch. You'll be able to do analog or digital. It's not like if you're in a band and he wants to do analog, I want to do it, we can't do that. We have to switch.
So with that, I can still use the PSM 1000.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. If you switch it to analog.
Yes.
The thing is really, really cool. It sounds. Have you listened to IEMs before?
Yeah.
It's like listening to Spotify or digital streaming. It is that clean.
It's very clean. It's a bit absurd, honestly.
The first time I heard it was like, oh no way.
Yeah.
And it was at a festival, like just tapping into somebody's.
Yeah.
in here.
I mean, the things that they want us in this PowerPoint to talk about here is obviously the digital audio quality, like you're mentioning, but also Dante digital inputs, encryption, which is not really important in live, but it can be in some situations. Super low latency, wide tuning, which is the big deal. That's like the big thing there, and just spectral efficiency. So we're about to talk about how to use wireless workbench to effectively and efficiently coordinate frequencies, and this is like the top of the top, right?
And the IR is on the back.
Yeah, that's true. You can actually read the body pack while you scan it, which is like, why didn't we think about this like 20 years ago? Yeah, so anyways, here's a bunch of other cool stuff it has. I'll just get to the end of these, and like, yeah, instead of having to use combiners with those crazy graphs we saw, these can actually combine internally. There's a bunch of slides about that I deleted because it's literally just like algebra. It's crazy. Show Link we talked about, so you can adjust things from a phone or an iPad. You can sync it over a network. There's going to be over-the-air firmware updates, so you no longer have to plug in transmitters to update their firmware. You can just like deploy a firmware, which is mind-boggling.
And dealers are taking orders already. Hermes can place an order for you, so you can already fish. I think they're starting to ship around February. It's kind of first come, first serve. So if you're there considering, jump on it.
Yeah. There's only one real thing that's super important on this slide, and that's that Shure is the first to market with a WMS product. We're the first ones to do that. The first ones to ship it. The first ones to actually put it in people's hands. Shure's been a company for 100 years as of this year. They know what they're doing. They know how to make mics. You saw they made the first wireless microphone in 1949. It's 75 years old. Like, that's insane, right? And now we're the first people to deploy the new technology stuff too. So you know, sure, you know that it's good stuff, right? So anyways, this is 80 PSM and what it looks like front and back. Yeah, easy, cool stuff. And this is kind of how the wideband stuff works. So again, you have the ability to do narrowband, but wideband works a little bit more like it does on the bottom, right? Now those channel counts are only 4, but you can actually fit a lot more channels into one of those wideband things. So again, true digital diversity and wide tuning, same stuff you get with any Axiom digital product, quality, yeah, all sorts of stuff. So that's the future, right? I think I have just a couple more slides here. We talked about this. You can you have everything up top, and then you have the screen on the front, but the scan is on the back, which is right here, which is honestly, yeah, I know it's annoying, but it's okay. Yeah, so cool. And then this is an important slide because it shows you that even in digital mode, there's less than 2.9 milliseconds latency, which if you're in touring, you know that's a big deal. 2.9 milliseconds is low. There, of course, if you go with just like an Axiom digital wireless microphone, it is a little bit lower, but you can't do nearly the channel count on a wideband. You can't do wideband at all. So yeah, huge deal there. And then in analog mode, you still have 1.29. And one last time, yeah, this is kind of how it works. You can do analog mode, which is a narrowband frequency. You can do digital mode, where you have a one channel. It's a wideband, but it's like it's not really using the whole band. And then you can do, right now, you can do a digital 4-pack in addition to what is in the hardware. So if you get like a quad, you can also get an additional 4 channels digitally. Okay, so that's all of my slides. Let's talk about wireless workbench. Let me switch over to that real quickly. Of course, I didn't put it on the right screen. Okay, so this is a scan of where we're standing right now. So a lot of you use wireless workbench, right? So you're probably very familiar with this, right? But let's talk about kind of what all you can do. I'll see if I can duck down some so everyone can see this. So the inventory tab of wireless workbench, this is where you're going to be able to see every device that's connected, right? A lot of you are probably familiar with this. Don't worry, I'll get to the cool stuff in a minute. So this is all of our microphones, or rather all of our transmitters. Up top, you can see the 8600, which is our spectrum analyzer. You can see the charger for our battery packs over here. You can see our ShowLink device. You can see all of our stuff. The inventory tab is very important because you need to verify that all your stuff is there and available, right? But something that's commonly not talked about in this tab, and I think is really important, is actually right over here. I know it's kind of hard to read, but it says interference avoidance mode. And you can see that I have it on automatic. So what interference avoidance mode does is if you assign backup frequencies to your spectrum analyzer, or rather to wireless workbench, automatic transmitter, or rather interference avoidance mode, will then automatically assign those backup frequencies if interference is detected. So what that means is if I'm using this microphone and I turn on this microphone and it interferes with this frequency, it will automatically switch this frequency on my body pack. Now, that's a huge deal in live, right? Because the last thing that you want is a singer to be singing and then have a dropout, and then you have to scurry and find a new frequency or something, or fix something, or you can't figure out what the problem is, right? This is going to avoid a lot of that issue for you. And honestly, there's a lot of stuff over here in the properties. Like you can switch which band you're in, or what standard or high density transmission mode, etc., etc. But interference avoidance mode, that is like number one. Every time I open this and I have to show somebody wireless workbench, that's the very first thing I show them. I'm like, hey, switch that to automatic every single time. And you have to do that with every single transmitter, right? So you can see I have to do it every single one, but it will save you so much time and so much headache. So if you take anything away from tonight about wireless workbench, click that button. It's going to help you a lot. Okay. So frequency coordination, this is probably what most people are familiar with. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Monitor, this is where you can just monitor the same thing that's on the front of your rack, right? So you're going to have your signal strength here, you're going to have your audio here, which I'm not using these microphones. These are actually these right here. That's why you don't see any audio here. You can see your battery level. You can see how many milliwatts of power it's being output. Lots of information here. Same stuff is on the front of your rack on all Shure products. And before I get too far, I should also mention, just to be nice, that if you were to add another device here, you can see that you can actually add non-Shure wireless devices to this. So Wireless Workbench is designed to be agnostic to any brand. So if I were to say, like, let's say I'm using, all these Axiom Digital products, but I also needed to add Electrosonics, whatever, then I could add that if I needed to. Or if I had a Sennheiser that I needed to add, I could add it here. So we make Wireless Workbench available for everybody because we believe that this is the best software for frequency coordination. So it doesn't matter if you're using a competitor product. This is something that I think is a really good thing to use. Okay, frequency coordination. So this is what everybody kind of wants to know, right? So what I've done is I did a scan using the 8600, which scans the entire frequency spectrum. I zoomed in on the stuff that we need here. I assigned 4 frequencies to these 2 microphones and 2 body packs over here. And then I assigned 4 backup frequencies. So you can see if you go down here to the bottom, primary frequencies, these are all my frequencies listed here. You can see the name of my microphones that are on. And you can see when there's nothing there, that's a backup frequency, right? You can see here I have 8 total frequencies selected, right? Now I can actually add a lot more by just clicking on this plus and adding a frequency. So now I have 9, and it's waiting for me to pick one, right? So most of you guys probably know how to do a basic coordination, right? You're going to hit analyze, so it'll determine, of course it did on the wrong window, but on my computer it's showing me all the possible frequencies here and saying, hey, there's no conflicts, right? Which is what you want, that's why you're analyzing. You'll hit this calculate button, which will calculate which frequencies it's going to use, which are the best available frequencies, and then you hit deploy, and you hit deploy all zones. And that will deploy all of your frequencies to where they need to go. You can see now I have 4 frequencies to have the active channels. I have 5 backup frequencies. At this point, if I'm running a show, I'm done. There's nothing else to do except monitor. That's how simple Wireless Workbench is, right? But let's say you don't have any of that, right? Let's go ahead and just delete this. Okay, done. Let's go ahead and scan. I'll do another scan, actually. So there's 2 types of scans you can do. You can do a continuous scan, or you can do a one-time scan. Let me see if I can get this to do what I want. Actually, let's just do this. Let's start fresh. All right, this is a brand new, it's like I'm opening it the very first time. So you can see all my inventory, same stuff is already here. I don't need to add anything else, right? My online device is here. It shows all my network card, and then it deploys immediately everything that's connected over the network, right? Okay, great. I have everything I need. Everything is set to automatic. Great. Okay, so I come over here. I'm going to select my 8600, which is my spectrum analyzer. Now you may not have an 8600, but in here you will use whatever you have, right? So you can see I can also scan directly from my receiver. But I'm not going to do that because I have the big bad boy, right? So you hit scan, and there it goes, man. That's in real time, all the RF. That red line in the center there, that's my RF floor, and then my scan peak threshold is the orange line, right? Boom. I just have a brand new scan. That's the entire RF spectrum where we're standing right now, right? So, if I want to select some frequencies, sorry, I'm duck again. I'm going to go select frequencies from inventory. Of course, it popped up on the wrong screen, but it's giving me 3 options here. I'm just going to select all frequencies from inventory. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull all of my inventory, all my microphones and transmitters, and it's going to assign frequencies for all of them, right? Cool. So you see that now my inventory has popped up right here. And it's waiting for frequencies to be deployed, right? You'll notice that the backup frequencies are not here, right? There's 2 things we can do. If we want to deploy a specific number of backup frequencies, we can hit this plus right here and add 4 more channels, and those will all become backup frequencies. If we want to do it the really cool way, we're going to go to the settings, and we are going to select automatically calculate backup frequencies. And when you do this, this is like kind of mind-blowing, honestly. This will calculate every possible backup frequency in your RF scan. So this is actually going to take a minute. So I'm going to hit, I don't need to hit analyze because there's no frequencies assigned. I can just hit calculate. Yeah, it just found, it's still searching, but it just found 77 frequencies I can use. So it's going to deploy 4 frequencies to the mics, and then it's going to deploy the rest of them as backup frequencies. So in that scenario, it's still working, by the way. So in this scenario, if I have a dropout, there are 73 other frequencies that it can deploy to automatically because of the settings I've enabled. So you can see how that could be a really powerful tool, especially if you're located here. There's 80 frequencies available. Like, that's crazy. So I don't expect that anybody located in McAllen is ever going to have frequency coordination issues, but this is just an example. It found another frequency. There's 78 now. So yeah, this is an example of what it looks like when you do this. I'm going to stop this because that's going to take a long time, and we have enough frequencies. And you can kind of zoom in here, and like, you can see exactly, come on. You can see exactly how accurate these frequencies are. All these green lines are available frequencies. So, yeah. And then if you can zoom out and you can see the entire frequency spectrum from like 4 something all the way up to 1,000 megahertz. So that is basically best practices for using wireless workbench. I know a lot of you guys use this. Are there any questions about that? Go.
The backup frequencies, can you save a backup to like a rack mount or unit and turn wireless workbench off, or it has to be wireless workbench has to be on?
That's a great question. So in this particular scenario, the 8600 is what's deploying the backup frequencies. If you were to do this and to deploy these frequencies with a receiver, you may not be able to use all of those backup frequencies, but you can deploy at least one backup frequency to each device, to each receiver. So you can't do that. You know, that's a good question. I don't know if you can do it from the rack itself, but you can do it here and then shut your laptop and it'll do that. Questions?
Is
Is it one backup frequency per rack or per channel?
You're talking about it if we did that? I believe it's per channel. Yeah. Questions? Anybody else? This is like, first time someone showed me this, it blew my mind. So, anybody else? All right, cool. Well, that's basically all I have. I hope you guys learned something. I hope I was able to instill some knowledge. We're going to stick around for a little bit longer. If you guys have any other specific questions, feel free. We're here to talk and eat. But thank you guys for your time. And yeah, have a great time with all your new knowledge.